Hello and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on getting creative with pumpkins at home for the autumn season. In this video I'm going to show you how you can take an ordinary pumpkin or a squash like I've got and cut into it to create a stylish autumn themed arrangement. And if you don't fancy going out and buying fresh pumpkins to display at home this autumn, how about making your own out of the pages of an old paperback book? You'll need a really sharp knife to cut into your pumpkin or squash. This one is absolutely a beautiful grey, but unlike a carving pumpkin, the flesh is really thick. So you can see here, I'm showing you that I'm going to cut a wedge out of the pumpkin as if I was slicing a piece of birthday cake. So you'll see as I go on with my super sharp knife here that it is really tough cutting through the pumpkin. I managed to start the cut off okay. As you can see, I haven't been able to carve right down to the bottom, so eventually I decided to switch positions, and then ultimately I went to find a smaller knife that was more manoeuvrable. This really was the hardest part of the whole project, doing this cutting out. So here I've got a knife that's a little bit smaller with a serrated edge and a point to it. And you can see I'm still having difficulty going backwards and forwards. So do take care at this point. Don't rush it, and do not cut yourself with your knife. That'll cause you even more problems. And I would, like I have here, work on a chopping board. You might even find it helpful to have your pumpkin sitting on a towel or something like that to stop it rocking around. So with my first slice done, I come in and go on the other side as well. And here I've changed my technique a little bit and sort of stabbing in, making a cut of 2 or 3 centimetres long, but still I'm having really great difficulty. And you'll see when I open up the flesh of the pumpkin how thick the skin and the actual pumpkin is inside. So it's not hollow like the carving jack-o'-lantern pumpkins that you're used to seeing. I did try there to score out my line first of all, but that didn't work because as the knife goes through, it takes its own path. And when you finally finish cutting, the section should slide out, and you can see there why it was so difficult to cut, because the skin is really tough and the flesh is really wide. Having done the difficult bit of pulling out a section of your squash, now the fun start begins with the flower arranging. So I'm using here is wet flower foam. So it's a brown variety, but it's biodegradable. So your own flower foam may be the green colour. Just make sure if you're using fresh flowers, you don't use the gritty flower foam, which is used for dried and silk flower arrangements. I've cut off a really small section of foam, and I'm just checking to see that it's the right size to fit into the opening, and cutting off some of the edges just to give me a wedge shape that will fit nice and snugly inside. When you're happy with the fit of your flower foam, you need to soak it in water and just let it sink down of its own accord. As the foam is so small, this will only take a few seconds. When your foam is soaked, you then put it back into the pumpkin, and it's such a good fit there it could probably hold on its own, but for a bit more security I'm going to use some cocktail sticks. You could use kebab sticks, slide them through the flower foam and then let them rest securely into the flesh of your pumpkin and trim off the excess, the pointy end. I did this a couple of times, but if you've got a bigger pumpkin you may need to add in more cocktail sticks for added security. Because your piece of flower foam is so small, you won't need that many flowers, so make sure you pick a pleasing selection of flowers. I've gone here for neutrals, pinks and greens to sit with a neutral colour of my pumpkin. I'm going to start with my largest flower first, which is my zinnia. It's got a soft hollow stem, so I'm going to make a guide mark first with a pencil, and as you can see there I just need to slice off an extra bit of the flower foam in order that the zinnia will sit nice and rounded with the outline of the pumpkin rather than sitting too far proud of it. Once you've got your main flower in, you can start to add in the smaller materials. So I'm working now with tiny buds of Lysianthus and just sliding them carefully into the flower foam where I find it most pleasing, but trying to keep everything within the outline, the edge of the pumpkin, so the arrangement will look as if it's a floral part of the pumpkin shell. I've also managed to find some tiny crab apples which look exactly like miniature apples. So as they don't have a stem, I've used my cocktail sticks again to push it into the cocktail stick, and then trimmed to size and pushed into the flower foam. And to fill in the gaps, I'm using some sedum. This is a lovely pale pink variety rather than the more usual icy green variety. And some of my sedum is in bud and other parts are in flower, so it gives a nice contrast. Once you've got your main materials in, you do need to make sure your flower foam is covered. So here you can see me chopping off the side shoots of this already small piece of sedum just to fill in the gaps. And left over in my bowl, I have got some hydrangea just to add some finishing touches. And again, you might need to use your pencil to make a guideline, because some of these stems, the materials are tiny, that they won't have strong enough stems to make their own hole into the foam. And there is the finished arrangement. So just check from all angles you haven't got any obvious bits of foam showing, and then you are done. As you can see, this is a beautiful arrangement to have in your home to celebrate the autumn season, and turning your back on the brash orange jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, choosing something more muted in tone and using that to select or guide your choice of flowers and greenery to use inside your own arrangement. Now, it may be that you don't want to have fresh pumpkins slowly rotting in your home over the autumn period, so another option is to make a pumpkin using the pages of a paperback book. I had to steel my nerves for this bit of the project, because I don't know how you feel about ruining a paperback book. It just feels so counterintuitive, but you'll see me here getting to grips with the project and ripping off the front cover and taking off the section of the spine as well, and when you get to it, it really is quite easy to do. You'll find this pumpkin template in the video playbook, so you can print off that particular page. I am just going to use half of the pumpkin as the template. You don't need to cut out the full pumpkin, so you'll see me going around here, and then I'm going to cut back down the fold line, and I will place that template next to the edge of the book and trace around it and cut it out. And when you've cut out your template, you need to line up the straight edge with the spine of the book. Now you can see here that the flat bottom of my pumpkin is sitting up a bit higher than the bottom of the page, and I want my pumpkin to be a bit bigger, so I'm using the template as a guide, but I'm doing a pencil line to draw a slightly bigger pumpkin, and that way I can adjust the size according to how big the pages are in my book. And then you need to get cutting. I've started off here cutting about 3 or 4 pages at once. This bit takes quite a while to do and is quite laborious, and my top tip is just make sure that as you cut each page, you're not making the pumpkin bigger and bigger, so you will need to go back and just make sure you really are trimming them all to size. So I didn't do a page at a time. I picked up as many as I could cut with my scissors. So my scissors are quite robust, and they were probably taking about 6 or 8 pages each time. This tricky bit at the top where the stem of the pumpkin was, but I guess you could cut it out separately if you wanted to. Just go nice and round and then use your scissors from the top end to cut down. Every so often I did flick the pages, the cut pages of the book over, so I just gave myself the last page to act as the template, just so it wasn't getting too bulky. So as you can see here, it's a bit like watching paint dry, so I'm going to speed the film up because you can see exactly what I'm doing now. From memory, my book had about 485 pages in it. I did a second book, which I'll show you later on in the video, and that had 390 pages in, and actually the smaller book worked out slightly better. I found that the thicker the book, naturally the wider the spine, and it was harder to get the book to curl round in a nice tight circle, so I did end up with a few gaps. I then took my book outside, and I've decided to spray this pumpkin orange just on the outer edges. So I didn't want to get my table dirty, so I have covered it with a cloth and then put my hand under the cloth so I don't spray my hand orange. And I do a quick test spray just so I can gauge how quickly the paint's coming out of the can and give it a light coat. Just squirt, 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 rather than doing one long, heavy, drippy coat of paint. And when the paint is dry, I start to fan out the pages. So you can see here there's just the lightest touch of orange on the edge, but mainly the pumpkin is going to look black and white. So I then turn the book over and I'm putting a pencil into the back of the spine and moulding the pumpkin around the pencil. And this is the bit that I found quite tricky, because I ended up with, instead of a total round core to my pumpkin, mine was a bit angled and therefore the pages splayed out unevenly. And then to fix it together, I'm using a glue stick on both of the end pages, and I'll curl them round together and then pin them in place using some wooden clothes pegs. The glue stick glue doesn't take very long to dry, probably 10 or 15 minutes. So the moment of truth is to remove the pegs and take out the pencil that you've wrapped the whole pumpkin around, and hopefully everything will be fastened together and then the pages will naturally flow out. As I said before, my inner core wasn't totally circular, so I do end up with a few gaps, but I think when you look at the pumpkin on the side, it just adds to the lovely homemade detail of this paper crafted work of art. For my second pumpkin, I've decided that I want to use an old wine cork to make the stem of my pumpkin. So I've done exactly the same thing, and I've cut out my pages using my template, and I've then cut a notch into the book. So instead of cutting their stem up and out as I did with the first pumpkin, I am just going through and cutting down and across and making a little trough that the cork stalk can stand up in. And again, I'm working with a few pages at a time, and once I've cut out the notch, I then flick the pages out of the way but keep one page back so I can follow the template, and hopefully that way that my little indentation will be the equal distance and equal sized all the way around. You'll find you only need to make 2 cuts to create each notch, once down the page and then back to the spine, and then you can just peel off the pages away from the gluey spine edge. Again, this only takes 3 or 4 minutes probably to cut your way all the way through the book, and as you see here, when I fan it all out and put the end pages together, you can see that little indentation, which is the perfect size for adding in the cork stalk. And if you didn't have a cork to hand, you could use a piece of twig or branch from the garden. I'm then taking my pumpkin back out into the garden, and I've got some black paint to spray the edges with. And when your paint is dry, you can put your pumpkin together. Now I've decided for this pumpkin that I don't want to permanently glue it together. I quite like the idea of clipping it together with paper clips so that I can have it up for the autumn season, and then at the end of autumn I can pack it away flat and store it and bring it out again next year. You see me wrapping the pumpkin around my pencil, and because the book is slightly shorter, 380 odd pages, it just made a tighter circle around the pencil, and the pages have fanned out in a much more even pattern. I couldn't find 2 matching paper clips. I've got a black one at the top and a red one at the bottom, so I just need to make sure that when I display it that I put the fixings against the wall so they can't be seen. And for the same reason, I'm just placing my cork inside the pumpkin. I'm not gluing it in place because I want to be able to dismantle it at the end of the autumn, but you could glue it in place if you wanted a more permanent fix. And here are my finished pumpkins. I am really pleased with the way they've turned out. I love the slice that's been taken out of the fresh squash, and I think that both the paperback books look really effective. I'd love to see how you get creative with your pumpkins this autumn, so don't forget to post a photo into my free Facebook group, Flower Start World, or tag me on Instagram. I'm at Flower Start with an underscore at the end, and use the hashtag Flower Start.